Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Laine. I'm the president of Liftport Group. On behalf of my team, really glad that you are here joining us. We're going to do something a little bit different today. I think if anybody's been following us along, we're still trying to kind of find our path, and that's pretty exciting. So we keep trying different things. You'll note that I'm a little casual today. If you've been watching this at all, I'm usually in a shirt, often a shirt and tie. I have one right on the chair right over there, and then my team talked me out of it because today I'm wearing a Starship Singularity t-shirt, so I'm super happy about that, and we're going to talk about that. So here's where we are. We've been doing these shows for about 3 months now, 3.5 months. We've got quite a few. They're starting to find their way onto our Spotify channel. Once we've got some more up, I'll share that link with y'all. And the show is really focused about that intersection of space and money, space and infrastructure, space and national policy, and space and commercialization, right? So that's kind of what our whole program is about. That's what the DareGreatly podcast is about. That's what the conference that we're going to have in just 2 months. We'll have our DareGreatly conference at the end of March. So definitely please join us for that. And that's what we're doing. We're going to explore that intersection between money, space, infrastructure, and national policy and commercialization. So with that, we felt like we wanted to kind of add a little bit more color to our programming from last week. If anyone was watching that was focused on the money of space. We pulled out a report from Space Capital, and we really, really dug into it a lot. So there's a few pieces that we didn't cover from a different report. I'm going to describe that in a moment. We're going to go through that, and then we're going to bring in Rachel to talk about Starship Singularity, and then we've got Dr. Doug Plata going to be joining us for the end of our program. But it should be a fun ride. So with that, I'm going to just cover a few things that we didn't talk about last week, which is here. And I know that it's not full screen. It's just a lot easier for me to operate this stuff if it's not full screen. So just bear with me on that. So Bryce is a different consultancy, a different management. Let's see, what do? They are analysts. They have been specializing in the space industry for a really long time. I think it's north of 10 or 12 years old. And they do something a little bit different. They're focused really on the startups of space, which is different from what we looked at the other day when we looked at the whole industry. So again, I'm not going to put as much time and effort into this document because it's old data. This is not a summary of 2022. This is kind of, this was issued in January of 2022. And so it's really a look back at 2021, which is why we didn't want to confuse it with the data that we had last week. We have looked. Bryce has not yet issued a current document. So this is the best we can do is go off of their old stuff, which is why we didn't really emphasize it the way we did the other. This one really focuses on the venture community in a way that the other one does not. And so that kind of matters. We're going to zip through several pieces of this. One thing I want you to kind of pay attention to is, they put a lot of emphasis on SPACs, the special purpose acquisition companies. I think by now you know that they have not done particularly well. This is kind of how they were trending at the end of 2022, and it's just gotten worse since then. So I don't think anything in this chart is going to surprise you. What I did like was, a kind of a mix of launch, Earth observation, in-space services, and other. I'm just going to say it. I'm a fan of both Redwire and Momentous. I have been for a long time. I'm a fan of Planet Inspire. I have been for a long time. If I was building the portfolio, I would probably weight these a little bit differently. But again, as we said last time and this time, this is not investment advice, just information about how things are going. There's been this whole strategy of growth by startups and by acquisitions. I think that's maybe the most interesting story in space commercialization right now is acquisition. I'll show you something in a moment, but if I had the capital that some of these companies have, I would be more aggressive in the acquisition side of things. This document looks at banks and corporations they have as acquisitions. So their numbers are different than the numbers that we looked at Wednesday with Space Capital. So don't be too worried that the numbers don't match. They're counting different things. And so, I would use this document as an additional piece of knowledge, not the whole takeaway. I think this is really interesting. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to put some time into our show this evening, was to pull this out. Back in the earliest days in 2000, all investments were first-time investors. This is a chart of first-time investors. It kind of kills me, this, all the investments, and this is not to say that all investment, there's 600 investments in the first year. There weren't. We talked about last week that in those earliest days, pre-iPhone, pre-SpaceX successful launch, there were space companies, but they were in pretty rough shape. Those are the days that Liftport started, 2004, 5, 6, and 7. It's funny how we basically went out of business at the very beginning of this growth curve. So that says something for timing. But one of the things I want to point out is that in the beginning, all investors were first-time investors. And then pretty quickly, you got to this point where still 63% are first-time investors. But there's still people that have been writing multiple checks in this industry. And that points to the education that this community has. It's learning, it's getting smarter. There aren't really a lot of exits yet. And usually, again, in the perspective of Silicon Valley, good exits means founders have done well enough to make a lot of money, to learn the ropes, and then they have excess money that they then put into VCs and angels and start a new community around that, with the expertise. And that was true with early days of Apple. It was true of early days of Microsoft. It's true of early days of Meta. It's true of early days of PayPal, right? And they refer to these folks as the PayPal Mafia or the Facebook Mafia. I think that title is kind of harsh. I think a lot of those folks, especially we're in the Seattle region, the folks that benefited from the early days of Microsoft have done quite well and been good for the community. So this knowledge line of people who are first-time investors in the sector versus multiple investments in the sector, I think that's really important. And the thing that's not really getting a lot of attention in the other document at all, and in this document, I'm not sure it's getting enough attention, is the role that banks and corporations play. They have a really important role in the growth of any company. It doesn't matter whether you're a local yoga studio or building an elevator on the moon. Banks are your financial partners, and corporations, in this case, either building things that are kind of outside their scope. Rather than build stuff that's outside their scope, they're going to go buy a company that has that as a core competency. And that has been fueling a lot of activity. I love this chart. Again, this is a year old, but I think it's still relatively accurate. It's showing that there's 100 investors in California, 100 investors in maybe 16 to 99 investors in Texas and Florida, 100 investors in Colorado. That makes sense, by the way. There's a lot of space activity in Colorado that's maybe not on the radar of everyone else. Our region has a little bit less, but still quite good. New York is and Washington D.C. Virginia are home to many space sector VCs. So this doesn't surprise me. What does surprise me is North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, Nevada, Georgia, Oklahoma. Those I really have a hard time getting my brain around, but it's cool that they exist. So I think that's something worth further examination. And then the global chart, no surprise, the United States and China with plus 100. I think there should be another marker that says plus 500, and I think the United States would be the only one in that category, as far as I'm aware. So I think that differentiation would be a little clearer if they just went a little bit further. But look at this quote, California, China, Japan, and the UK account for half of investments in space in the last 20 years. No surprise, but still pretty amazing. I would not have thought that Japan was on that list. I am not very clear on their entrepreneurial efforts, so I'm going to look into that a little bit. Lots of angel investors. We're not going to get into that. This chart, I really want you to pay some attention to. This is a chart on the left of the investor groups, the venture funds, and this is a group on the right of where they put their money. For example, our friend Daniel Faber at Orbit Fab, he's gotten money from number 25, Space Fund, and number 27, Techstars, right? And that's how you look at this chart. I've personally met Jurvetson, the DJF, and I talked to him about his SpaceX investment. And they were one of the earliest space investors, one of the very earliest space investors. And I asked him why take that risk, especially in the earliest days of SpaceX. And he said point blank, because we missed him when we interviewed him for PayPal. And they weren't going to miss that chance again. So that was, it wasn't about the technology, it was about the person. I think that's pretty interesting. Many of these companies have a somewhat similar story. I'm not going to go into all the companies. I think there's an interesting story to many of them. I know some of the stories. I want to spend a little bit of time on the investor companies in the first place. I'm going to start with the bottom, Techstars and Y Combinator. Those are two of the largest incubators, maybe in the world. They have thousands of companies in their portfolio. Just remember that when I get to another slide. Then I'm going to look at Starbridge and Space Fund and Space Capital and Seraphim. These four companies are specialists that. Oh, I left out Space VC. Sorry. These five companies are specialists in the field. They only invest in space companies. They only invest in space companies. I've been friends with the folks at Space Fund and Starbridge and Space Capital for a long time. I don't know the folks. I've been friends with the folks at Space Fund, Starbridge, and Space VC for quite a while. The Starbridge and Space Fund people I've known for 15 and 12 years respectively. More than that for Space Fund actually. Those five though are specialist investors in the field. All of the others, space is a component of their portfolio. Some focus on deep tech. Most of them focus on, the next .com, the next app, the next whatever. So most of these are kind of normal VCs. They're dipping their toe into the field. But then you look at this chart about how many companies they're funding. Again, if Techstars has thousands of investments, having 20 plus deals is still a pretty minor part of their portfolio. If Y Combinator has thousands of deals, 13 investments is a really small part of their portfolio. So you have to kind of think through that a little bit. I particularly like Space Capital has 17 deals, right? They're literally putting their money where their mouth is. That's why I have a lot of respect for them. And then down on this side of the chart, there's a lot of noise here. Like these are companies, normal VCs, other than Space VC. Most of these are normal VCs that are putting some of their capital into space, right? Prime Mover is putting money into deep tech. Well, deep tech can be, the hardware side of computing, and it can be communications, and it can be, I don't know if they have medical technology, but they have a lot of hard, deep technology investments. And space is a portion of their portfolio. Whereas Space VC, Space Fund, and Starbridge, they are specialists in the field. They just simply don't have a lot of cash. Like they don't have giant portfolios the way, Sequoia and DJF and others have, right? And let's point out Incutel. Incutel has 11 deals in space. Incutel is the investment fund for the CIA. I am not kidding about that. That is their actual role, is to figure out spy tech for the CIA and invest in it. And so space is a component of their portfolio, right? So I like this chart. I think this chart's really useful. I think it's probably actionable. This is something that we, Liftport, are probably going to work on. I think that's all the big stuff I wanted to cover. Let me just scan this a little bit. We haven't talked very much about private equity, corporate investors. Corporate investors are going to play a larger and larger role in this field. This would be the Raytheons, Boeings, Lockheeds buying or partnering or investing in smaller technology companies. I honestly don't know a lot about these, so I don't feel confident in having a conversation. So I'm going to look into that a little bit more. We've already talked about public offerings in 2021. This is useful. This chart is very useful. How much money people put into each sector. I had a conversation last week after the show about the difference between an angel investor and a venture capital and private equity. This is a really good chart. It's one of the main reasons I wanted to kind of showcase here. No surprise here. One surprise here on debt financing, I didn't think it was 11%. So again, I just said a moment ago, I don't know that much about the banking side of the space sector. I'm going to look into that a little bit more. I do think that it's worth pointing out that seed, prize, and grant funds are 14% of $52 billion. So is that NASA money? Is that DARPA Air Force, NASA NOAA money? I'm really unclear about that. There's not an explanation in the chart about that. So that's something that's really worth puzzling over. But we in the industry refer to that as non-dilutive capital, which means if we were to get a contract from NASA or Space Force, that would be a research project that we would do, and then they would pay us for the work, right? That's revenue. I would not have put revenue in this chart. So I'm very confused by that. But non-dilutive capital is super important. And by non-dilutive, it means we don't have to give up equity in the company to get that contract. I just call that revenue. I just call that cash flow. But they pulled it out separately, and I think that's confusing. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about this very much. Lots of deals happening. We talked about this a lot, that there's a lot of deals being made, and seed money is where a lot of stuff is happening. Early investments, skipping some of this stuff, because we really talked about this a lot the other day. Everybody knows SpaceX is the top story. Not everybody knows that OneWeb and Sierra Space are next. All of these organizations are growing. They're going to be household names at some point, I think. I like this chart a lot. I think it's important, and this is where I said if I had some of the capital that some of these organizations have, I would be aggressively buying. This chart is 2021. I know for sure that Redwire and Voyager bought at least 2 more companies. I think Redwire bought 3 companies last year. So they are building a lot of in-house capabilities by acquiring other companies. And by the way, I want to point out the companies that they're acquiring all have their own specializations. They all have their own revenue and product lines. So Redwire is being very smart about their acquisition strategy from an outsider. I don't know what the inside looks like. And I find it interesting that SpaceX, with all their capital, has only acquired 1 company. That surprises me. Okay, moving on. We've already seen this chart about, I think everybody knows that 2021 into 2022 was pretty rough on SPACs. So with that, we're going to end there. And I'm going to close this down. Were there any short questions on that? Yes, Doug, we see you. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're here. I'll bring you on in a bit. And with that, I'm gonna swap gears over to. Let me just close this down. I'm going to switch gears over to Starship Singularity conversation. All right. Just a moment. Okay. Doug, I'll bring you on in just a moment. Thank you. I'm going to bring in Rachel before that. Okay. So let me just tell you a quick story. About 2 years ago, let me see. About 2 years ago, this idea of the Starship Singularity was formed. And I've been kind of slowly, doggedly working on a paper to try to help people understand that everything is going to change. Absolutely everything in the world. We keep focusing on the space side, and Doug and I are going to have a conversation about that. Rachel's going to have a conversation about that. We keep focusing on the space side of things, but I promise you the rest of the world is going to change as a result of this new capability. So what does it mean? First of all, let's go to the appendix here. This idea of a singularity actually comes from Dr. Werner Vinge. He created this concept of the technological singularity 30 years ago. And it was brilliant then, and it remains brilliant. I really strongly recommend reading this thing. It's available in several places all over the internet. I reproduced the whole article in my document because it said so. But I have the whole thing in here, and it's pretty fascinating. The basic premise is that computers are going to, quote, wake up and give superhumanly intelligence may be developed. And if anybody's been watching ChatGPT in the last couple of weeks, I think that we've already started to hit some of that. I think it's pretty fascinating. This paper is definitely worth reading. I'm not gonna summarize it, but the gist is that things are going to change technologically because of computers, and I say that things are going to change in the world because of this kind of mammoth rocketry. So we're going to talk about that here in a moment. You can see that this is a paper that's just still a work in progress, but I want to point out this day, January 16th, 2020, so basically 3 years ago, I believe the world changed fundamentally on that day, even though the world hasn't really woken up to it. This is pre-Tesla drama. This is pre-taking over Twitter drama. This is when Musk was kind of doing the work in the trenches to make sure that SpaceX did what it's supposed to. Hats off to Gwen Shotwell, his CEO. She just got an award just a couple days ago. Was announced. I don't remember exactly what the scope of the award was, but in my opinion, she's one of the most badass people in space, and she's made SpaceX possible in a way that I don't think that is really appreciated or seen publicly. But this quote that Starship is going to have 3 flights a day, so about 1,000 flights a year at 100 tons per flight. So just let that sink in for a second, right? That's 661,000 pounds to orbit every day. To put that in perspective, the International Space Station's only 925,000 pounds. So you get 30% more than the whole International Space Station that took 15 years to build. You get 30% more in a weekend, right? I think the world is about to change pretty dramatically. China, Russia, European Space Agency, India, Spain, all of these are pioneering their own flavors of reusable launch. and China is really working on some new stuff. They are trying to build a 150-ton system, 50% bigger than the 100 tons. And one of the reasons why we decided to do the program today the way that we are is that over the weekend, SpaceX changed their website, and that says they are able to get 250 metric tons to orbit if you're willing to expend the primary spacecraft. If you're willing to drop that thing in the ocean, they're going to get 250 metric tons at a time. That is boggling. I want to talk about that. So there's more to this document. My plan is to invite a whole lot of really smart people to join me on this thing. Folks that are, thought leaders in academia, civil space, commercial space, defense, and then non-government agencies and futurists. So these are folks I'm inviting to kind of be a part of this paper. I should have had it done, over the holiday, Thanksgiving and Christmas. I didn't. Still working on it, but it's not done yet. And so with that, I wanna bring in Rachel to talk about some of the defense implications. So folks have seen. Let me stop sharing here. People have seen Rachel. She's our special correspondent with a background in defense. So what's some of the stuff that you've learned lately?
Regarding this, what we've discussed here before, you've mentioned SpaceX as the top story in current citizen-driven enterprises, and we've looked at the commercial-centric points of these enterprises, but we really haven't looked at how this applies to global security efforts. So actually, I'm going to go back earlier into our programming on an episode that we aired as an aggregate broadcast on our channel in November. We saw Matthew Anderson, Director of Outreach at the Space Force Association, and Lieutenant Colonel Nara Ladd, probably not pronouncing his name right, Chief Airlift Branch at U.S. Transportation Command. They gave a presentation on rocket cargo point-to-point transportation, which is where I'm bringing this to. SpaceX is a leader in the citizen spacecraft enterprise. So as a business, SpaceX would address some of the applications that they were speaking about defense is really seeking after. So Lieutenant Colonel Ladd spoke about the capabilities that would interest commanders of Space Command and U.S. Transportation Command, which is the U.S. military's Transportation Combatant Command Center and provides globally integrated transportation support to 10 other combatant units within the U.S. defense space. I'll bring it back to a worthy point Anderson noted in that episode. You can go back to our channel archives to see it. I believe it aired on November the 18th. Is the strategic placement of Space Command as a geographic zone of U.S. defense. Because it was listed as a geographic zone, at some point in the future, the general assigned to Space Command and the U.S. Transportation Command could call on those logistic capabilities for support in space. So since we're discussing SpaceX as part of this other group of enterprises that Michael mentioned near the beginning of the show, how citizen-owned enterprise advances space capabilities and really drives forward the singularity technology of rocketry, I'm going to briefly break down some of the pain points that Narad highlighted during his Blue Marble Week appearance, which is the episode I referred to earlier. Pain points he highlighted there are good touch points for the defense business case for SpaceX as a leader in the citizen enterprise of spacecraft production. SpaceX solves some of the pain points that the U.S. has when it thinks of cost and production and speed and all of those things that would make it usable into the defense space. Citizen enterprises like SpaceX works around some of these issues, and by doing so, it works out the speed and accessibility at the same time. So on this level of defense, cost issues usually revert back to policies. They have to be formed. Budgets have to be determined by high officials in the government and in the military construct. defense assets are sometimes redistributed across U.S. defense and foreign aid priorities. So the logistics of revenues and things like that aren't always available at the time. But because SpaceX is a citizen enterprise and we see it mass producing rockets, it's able to move a little bit faster in production terms. So while SpaceX receives government funding, we've seen some things about that in the news, it's not entirely dependent on those funds or those policies being a citizen enterprise, and that gives it a different production path that state-owned agencies don't always circumstantially access. So as SpaceX mass produces spacecraft, the general capacity of their enterprises increases. As physical capacity is enabled through this production line, speed and accessibility ramp up. In that case, U.S. defense will then be able to contract companies like SpaceX and other enterprises to purchase their innovations for national defense in a way that you see the Air Force does with Lockheed Martin and has for some time. So what you're essentially seeing with SpaceX is the citizen bridge to the defense capabilities that would interest the defense command, the space command geographic points. And with that, I'd like to pass it back to Michael.
Terrific. Thanks a lot, Rachel. I think that I'm not like trying to sit here and like rattle any sabers or anything like that, but I think the idea of point-to-point suborbital for anything, whether that's earthquake relief in Haiti or some other natural disaster, the Red Cross can use point-to-point suborbital technology just like everybody else can, right? I think you're going to wind up with medical breakthroughs. Some poor person. Some person had bad luck and gets in a car accident in Chicago, and then somebody else is like, hey, I need that heart, I need that kidney, I need that whatever. There's gonna be lives changed and on a personal level and at a global level because of point-to-point suborbitals. So the military certainly has a role in that. I think the idea of being able to drop ship 1,000 U.S. Marines, combat-ready Marines, anywhere in the world in 90 minutes is a game changer in the world. Again, not to rattle any sabers, but to understand that the world is changing and there's going to be circumstances, ripple effects out of this technology. So thanks a lot, Rachel. Talk to you soon. And with that, I'm Dr. Plata, I'm going to bring you on. Thank you, sir. Welcome. Thanks for coming back to the show. For those that don't know, Dr. Plata has been on our show twice now, really to talk about his space development network and some of the stuff he's doing kind of as a I'm gonna jokingly call it a side hustle because you're a medical doctor and you're at your practice right now, but your love is space. So, can you give us just a super short recap of your space interests and credentials, and then let's jump into talking about Starship a little bit.
Yeah, well, like you say, I'm a physician. I do urgent care and occupational medicine, and my space work is really as a space advocate. I don't earn a living in the space field, and not really planning on doing that. I'm not trying to get into aerospace medicine or anything like that. I'm quite happy with where I am. But my passion, obviously, as a side hustle. I'm not quite sure I've heard it that way, but certainly is space, and so I've started a free to join network, the Space Development Network for space advocates of all levels, free to join, and developed one of the most extensive space advocacy websites out there, developspace.info. And one of the main projects, we're a projects-oriented organization. What we are doing is, one of the things we're focusing on right now is we have constructed a full-scale mock-up of a lunar base and Mars base that we're going to display at Rocket Ranch at the time of the initial orbital attempt, and then at major launches in Boca Chica after that. And so if any of the viewers are planning on being down there, we would love to connect with you. We'd love to have you come and check us out. It's not just the full-scale mock-up of the inflatable lunar base. It's also a space fair. So we're going to have a large number of exhibits, mock-up telerobots, and you name it. And that's going to grow over time. So, and I'm telling you, if 2018 was any example, you know, when SpaceX launched their Falcon Heavy and there's 100,000 people out to watch that, I personally think there's going to be at least that number of people at Boca Chica, and I think you better book the hotels early, because it's not like Orlando or anything like that. So yeah, that's what I'm doing with the Space Development Network.
Cool, great. So let's talk about Starship, because you've got a very specific perspective on this. I really want to share that. We've not been able to kind of talk about it before. I said you could launch, 30% more than the ISS. I did some like envelope, back of the envelope math. So might be wrong on this, but you could launch herds of elephant here, right? Like let's talk about here. I'm just going to read this off just to kind of like put this in perspective. And another exercise, let's think about elephants. Picture launching 82 fully grown 8-ton male African, the bigger of the species, elephants into orbit over the weekend. An average herd consists of 8 to 100 animals, calves, many cows, and juveniles of 4,000 to 12,000, and alpha males hitting 16,000 pounds. With this Starship Singularity sort of excess capacity, you could launch a herd of elephant every day. Right? Like,
is this what you're putting into a business?
That is I just read that word from my paper, because I want people to think about just how crazy this is, right? Just how giant and huge this is. I have stuff in there about, you could launch everything that launched in a 3-month period. Everything that launched in the last 3 months could launch in a single day. Like I have other technical quotes in there that like doing comparisons. You could launch everything that launched in the last 3 months, every rocket around the world in the last 3 months. You could launch that equivalent mass in a day, right? But that doesn't really tell the story about the excess capacity. So I threw in elephants, a herd of elephants every day you could launch. So my brother is really big on whales. He wants to see a space station that can support a pod of killer whales. That's a big space station. So I want people to think in excess. So,
but Michael, I understand that this is just showing the magnitude, and it's a helpful way to think. But we got to be sort of hard nosed in looking in assessing from a probabilistic standpoint as to what actually is going to be launched.
Right.
And that's not an easy question. But I think it's possible, looking at the relevant factors, to get a sense of what is probably going to be, rather than what we would like for it to be or what it could be.
Okay. So where do you think we're going with this? What do you think? What do you do with 100 tons a day? 300 tons a day in 3 separate flights?
Yeah. So Michael, first of all, I would just like to absolutely second your Starship Singularity concept, because I think it's generally recognized in the space advocacy community that Starship represents a game changer, or if you want to call it the Starship Singularity. I tend to think of Singularity as being sort of an exponential thing, and I'm not quite sure Starship is is exponential, but man, it's a multiple order of magnitude step up, you know? And so I would go so far as to say that when we look back at Starship, we are going to recognize that it was one of the most important historical turning points in human history. That's how I would describe it.
Yep.
And the fundamental reason for that is not because of Starlink, not even because of space tourism, not even because of the finances, but it's, you know, you think back in 1492, there's all sorts of things going on. What was the most important thing about what happened in 1492? Obviously, it was Columbus discovering the Americas. Obviously, there are people here, but I mean, that was the beginning of what became the United States and the countries of the New World. And what it was not, in retrospect, what it was not a breakthrough for the shipping industry. It was not, you know, what tobacco, was there even gold? Was there? Yes, you know, was there pelts? Absolutely. So there were these financial benefits, but what really matter is Western civilization was moving, and that led eventually to the establishing United States, which was very important for establishing democracy in modern times, and how we sort of saved World War I and II, and spread the concept of liberty and democracy throughout the world, to where now most countries are democratic countries. That's the significance of it. And so I think as we look at Starship, there's all sorts of things that it's going to change. But I think fundamentally, we'll look back at Starship as a time when humanity literally, and I think this is going to start to happen within 10 years of now, started to move, establish footholds, and began to spread beyond Earth. And that is, like, historically the game changer. Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%. And I think it's really important that you add in, you know, first you started with a concept that's 500 years remote, and then you ended with it's going to change in the next 10 years, right? You're going to be able to put a mark on the map, on the timeline, and say, this is when humanity as a species, our global culture changed because this capability came online. And you can't do that with railroads or airplanes, right? You can point to the day we flew in Kitty Hawk. You can point to you know, the Golden Spike in Utah, you know, the Transcontinental Railroad, and those were, I would say, those were significant moments, certainly, but I don't think that they changed humanity as a species, right? And I don't know that there's another analogy that's quite as big as what we're about to do.
So I guess I'm not sure I say as a species, because that implies that we're Earth to a new species. Frankly,
Okay.
I'm not a big fan of we're going to create Homo celestis, or whatever they call it, cosmicus or whatever, in the normal way that you think of evolution, because you know, as a physician, if anybody's getting to the point where they cannot reproduce, well, that's disease, and we all
that's not going to help, right?
So that's not the way that humanity is going to change. Genetic engineering, absolutely, I think that's going to become a reality. But frankly, that's going to happen whether we go to space or not.
Right.
You know, and I don't think you can modify humans to breathe in a vacuum, and to I mean, maybe be able to give the genes to be able to handle the radiation.
I'll change my wording and say it's not necessarily going to change the species, but it's going to change the global culture. That's fair?
But this is the thing, and that is, it is, I think, actually, the Western society getting into the New World, it is the example, because you could say, did that change human society? And it did, because it gave an opportunity to experiment with different forms of governance that then did go ahead and change the rest of the world. And it was necessary to sort of have a new beginning, new frontiers, and that totally changed things. And I do think that this is pretty relevant, because I think when you get, my personal belief is that when you get to the moon and Mars, and obviously free space, that there will be places there where the people who move will come to a point where they get large enough where they will vote to become their own political entity. Okay, and there will be factors by which people will divide themselves. Language is probably the number one, but other things, religion as well as political philosophy like libertarianism. And I think there will be an opportunity for people once again, because there is now a new frontier, once again to be able to start experimenting with different forms of political governance and be able to show all of humanity different ways of doing things, and perhaps is there a better ideas out there. As it stands right now, pretty much all of the Earth, I mean, except for the oceans, right, is locked down in terms of governance. But the moon and Mars and free space, it's there's real opportunities there for that, and that could make significant changes.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that. That's the seasteading style governance philosophy, just taken a step further to orbital stations, the moon, Mars, etc.
Right.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Yeah.
People can say the OST, Outer Space Treaty, is not going to allow that. The OST doesn't allow countries on Earth to be able to claim territory.
Yeah.
You have an entity that's not part of the OST. They're not bound by the OST. And when people move off Earth, when they vote to become a separate political entity from any country on Earth, they're a new political entity. Are they going to sign the OST that prevents them from declaring? No, they're going to say we're governing ourselves, and they have the most legitimate case to claiming territory because they're the ones living there. And
let me put a clarifying comment in that the Outer Space Treaty is a series of about 4 documents written in the late 1960s or so, 67, 68, I think, and 69 even, before folks went to the moon, but everybody knew it was happening. So there's a lot of diplomatic history built into those documents. And some of them are really strong and kind of appreciated all the way up till now. Some of them are very contentious. And so there was a movement to create the Moon Treaty in the 70s, which only nations that did not have a space program at the time signed. Curiously, there are 2 nations, I'm not going to name them, that are signatories of the original Moon Treaty that are now signatories of the Artemis Accords. One of them recently officially put in notice that they were going to withdraw from the Moon Treaty.
Yeah.
So that the politics of Earth are definitely following us out into space, even before we get there again in mass. So I find that pretty interesting. So I think you're right that there will be organizations that organize in space, from space, and for space. Hard to imagine them.
Here's a comment that is, countries on Earth are not going to allow the people who moved off to form their own independent political entity. They will somehow stop it. And I'm sorry, I honestly don't believe that. Seriously, is the United States going to prevent starships to supply these new political entities, these countries? I don't think so. I think the majority of Americans are going to be, independence. We believe in independence.
It's bad business. It's bad business to do that.
Well, it's bad business, but also just from our own standpoint, we're not, if the U.S. government says no more launches, I think there'd be a whole lot of resistance, and including if that threatens the life in those settlements, a lot of those people are going to have family members back on Earth.
Right.
And are we just going to sit around and say, well, okay, I guess, well, no, there's no way that's going to happen.
No.
And then are all the countries going to prevent, resupply of the, and by the time they reach, 50 or 60,000 people to where they say, hey, let's start governing ourselves. Maybe that's not a country, but a territory or some interim sort of thing. Are they going to be producing the majority of their mass already? Are they going to be harvesting the ice? Are they going to be on Mars producing plastics with all that it can do? Are they going to be growing their food? I think, in 2 or 3 decades, I think absolutely they will reach that technical capability. So it's really low mass is what they need. They need the computer chips and maybe a few other refined products, high precision products. So I think we're looking at new countries off Earth.
Yeah, I do think there's going to be some interesting changes. There's already talk about corporations being developed in space for space, and I think there's some interesting legal arguments on that topic. What are your thoughts towards? So reusability is the key to Starship. It's the key to SpaceX in general, and you've seen reusability in other places. Kind of give us some ideas about what the next. I always use 2035 as our marker. So, what do you think we're going to have? And we only have 4 more minutes. We got to talk fast. What are our where are we going to be in 2035? Just 12 years away.
Michael, if you don't mind, let me question that started, and that is Starship. Why is Starship such a singularity? Let me quickly go through, and I actually wrote down some notes here. Levels of reusability. If we have obviously full reusability, that dramatically reduces the cost. Even if we have partial, if we get back only 33 engines per launch and lose 6, hey, that is still huge, you know. But even if we have no reusability, if we never retrieve any of the stages, it's still much cheaper than like SLS. So for all of those reasons, even if you imagine almost no reusability whatsoever, Starship dominates in all levels because it's a super heavy, so on a per kilogram and per passenger, it's going to be so much cheaper. Also, frequency of use, it dramatically reduces costs. So we think about launching other satellites. Yeah, there will be some business for that. Depots will increase the flight rates. Okay. Mars settlement, okay, is, you know, if the per seat price can get down low enough, then that's going to be significantly used. Moon settlement is going to be even higher because the 70 times shorter travel time than Mars. So there'll be a lot of trips there. LEO tourism, I think, is in fact going to be a huge business, depending upon the per seat price. And of course, that has to do with the degree of reusability. If you have full reusability, then you're talking about a trip to low Earth orbit within the reach, the financial reach of a very large number of people on Earth.
Dr. Zubrin said $50,000 would be the price that he would say settlement to Mars was going to be $50,000. Is that in the ballpark you're thinking?
Well, I was thinking about $50,000 to LEO,
Okay.
and I think it would be about 5 times that to get to Mars. But what I would say is that, you know, the price changes over time. It's going to probably $1 million.
Are you thinking this is all going to be possible by 2035? Is that the time frame that you're on?
No, I mean, come on, that's only 2 years from now, or 2 to 3 years.
35.
Oh,
2035. 35.
Yes, and here's a key point, and that is SpaceX is not only developing the Starship, it's developing the factories to produce a fleet. They've already produced 200 as of November or September of last year, and a Raptor 2 engine per day, 365 Raptor engines at least, and they're wanting to get 3 or 4 per day. So we're literally talking about they are well on their way to getting a factory to produce a fleet.
Yep.
So 2035, goodness, that's
12 years. A lot can happen in 12 years.
They're going to have at least hundreds, if not 1,000 Starships by 2035.
I don't know that I agree with thousands, but hundreds for sure. I mean, look at this picture that we've got as an overlay, right? You can see two on screen now, and you know there's more coming, right? So, and these are not even the final production models, so we don't know what that's going to look like.
Run the numbers based on production rate of the engines and figure 33 engines, per, and then let's say 6. And let's assign half of the engines to boosters and the rest of the half to Starships, and do the math. I encourage you to do this because you're skeptical about the 1,000. Do the math and tell me what number you come up by 2035.
All right.
Can you do that homework for me?
Yeah, I will. I like that. I like that. That's a good exercise.
Something happened to me.
That's all right. You're good. You're good. All right, Dr. Plata, we're going to close it.
I can't hear you.
Okay. We're going to close it at that point. Thank you so much, Dr. Plata. Really appreciate your insight. I think your homework is a good assignment. And with that, we're gonna close down for the day. We're gonna leave you with a really cool picture. This is our new comet. This is our comet that hasn't been seen for 50,000 years. Not gonna come our direction again for I think I heard millions of years. I'm confused by that a little bit, but this is over Mount Etna in Italy, and it's the picture of the day. So love this stuff. It's beautiful. And with that, we just want to say thanks everyone for being a part of our show. Thanks Rachel and Leah for all of your behind the scenes support. Jen, Taylor, Yusuf, thank you guys. Thanks team for being a part of this. And then to our audience, thanks a lot for being a part of this. This is important stuff for us. So and you heard it here, right? Dr. Plata thinks that the world's going to change pretty dramatically in the next 12 years, and I agree. So with that, we're gonna bolt on out of here. Have a great night, y'all. Bye-bye.